You stupid biped! No.
We are talking Bride of Re-Animator, also known as Re-Animator 2, from 1990. This one directed by Brian Usner, who is a producer of the first movie. And this one once again stars Jeffrey Combs and Bruce Abbott. So it is a follow-on from the original, though it kind of ignores the finale of the first movie. I won't say why in case you haven't seen it. And it picks up, I think, less than a year after the end of the original movie, although obviously there's a 5-year gap between when these movies came out. So the film starts with Herbert West, played by Jeffrey Combs, and Dan Cain, played by Bruce Abbott, now working as a kind of Doctors Without Borders types. And there's a kind of, they meet like a female who will play a part in the movie later on. But they're still continuing with their kind of experiments and stuff, trying to, create life. And then it kind of cuts back to them working in this kind of hospital, and Dan Cain's character is feeling like a kinship with this woman who is has some type of terminal disease, and who ends up dying later on in the movie. At the same time, we have a old rival that comes back and starts to give our kind of protagonist a little bit of grief from the first movie. You could probably guess who that is. And obviously it ends in a kind of zombie smackdown. This time though, the difference is that the zombie formula now creates kind of hybrid creatures that are made up of hodgepodge of different body parts. And we have, of course, this female that is this kind of patient that dies in the movie, played by Catherine Kinmont, who is given Barbara Crampton's character's heart from the first movie to come back to life. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. Okay, so what works with this movie? Like I say, this movie introduces a couple of new elements in the fact that these kind of zombie creatures that are now can be stitched together with various parts from animals, other humans, all sorts, to create these kind of misfit sort of style creations. All look very kind of grotesque. But it does give you a sense of variety, I suppose, and also the grotesque nature of obviously kind of what's going on. And there's some pretty good VFX in regards to the realisation of how these kind of these creatures are looking on screen. They're kind of quite fun. Obviously, it's somewhat dated at this point, but nonetheless, it's still some fun kind of practical kind of VFX here. So that's all pretty good. The movie is obviously taking cues from The Bride of Frankenstein, and there's kind of a similar theme as the first one had themes from Frankenstein. Once again, I think Jeffrey Combs shines as Herbert West, this kind of eccentric scientist who's as much as an antagonist than he is a protagonist, which makes for an interesting kind of character, whilst the Dan Cain character is much more of your sort of stereotype good guy. I will say though, I wonder why at this point the Dan Cain character is still sticking with Herbert West. You would think he probably wouldn't. Again, if you extrapolate the events of the previous movie, but he's still there, and they're still kind of working together for some reason. And we have obviously the re-emergence of Dr. Hill now with kind of bat wings towards the end of the movie. It's pretty fun, and his scenes are always great as well. He has this kind of menacing presence, and he gets this kind of like lackey, and he's now able to kind of control other sort of zombies. So again, this gives him sort of a slightly more power maybe than the rest of them. The zombies in this movie are a little kind of they varied in regards to their levels of intelligence. And it has a more comedic tone, which is a good and a bad thing, but it's certainly more zany. So I mean, the original film was had said the creators, they kind of used the Evil Dead films as a template, and Evil Dead 2 is much more comedic than the first movie, and this kind of feels like it's taking that kind of route. And there's certainly some sort of slapstick kind of moments here. Although I think Evil Dead 2 ends up being a more well-rounded movie, whilst this one I think its more comedic elements are sometimes at odds with the kind of the intenseness of and the gravity of what's kind of going on screen. But it makes for some levity, has some kind of fun elements here. What doesn't work, now, as I just said, I think maybe the humour in some aspects does detract from the kind of the story here, because there are some very goofy moments in this movie that I think, border on almost a spoof at times. The introduction of these kind of misfit creatures, where they are just, a hodgepodge of different body parts. It's a fun idea, but we're kind of going much more into kind of like sillier fantasy territory. Whilst you can kind of, the first movie, obviously it's all fiction, of course, and no one's sort of saying that, but you could, there's this reagent can animate, dead people, and depending on how they died or the length of death, they'll kind of retain some kind of level of intelligence and things like that. This one almost kind of throws that out the window in favour of, let's have some weird visuals, but realistically don't think about it too much, because how is a few fingers and an eyeball able to kind of like coordinate and things like that? It doesn't really make any sense, as much as these movies ever do, but it almost feels like this film is disregarding any type of believability or rationale for any scientific method that the first movie tried to kind of sort of inject into it, and in favour of kind of just like, hokum visuals, basically. So there's that. And as I said, I think maybe this movie is guilty of almost somewhat retreading the original film. As I said, the relationship between Dan Cain and Herbert West, I feel needed to have progressed to a degree, but it feels like it's kind of the same. And I do question why the Dan Cain character is, who's presented to be maybe a little bit more rational and kind of grounded, why he still is getting involved in it with Herbert West, who is probably off his rocker. And why does Herbert West really need Dan Cain? I never really found a reasonable explanation, to be honest. And then let's talk about the actual bride. To be honest with you, I think the title Re-Animator 2 is more apt for this movie, because I didn't feel the bride actually really brought much to this movie. In actual fact, it has very little screen time and is really a subplot really than the main plot here. And that kind of series of events, it doesn't really have any impact on the story as a whole, I wouldn't say. And as such, it's something that's brought in quite late in the game for a short time, and ultimately, even if that situation hadn't happened, all of the characters would still be in the same situation as they would be if it had never happened at all. So it seems a little pointless, seems a little not particularly worked in that well, I would suggest. However, this movie is still a fun movie. As I say, it's more zany than the first. Certainly, there's more, visually speaking, in some regards, with these kind of like mutated misfits kind of creatures and stuff. And there is a lot to enjoy if you like the first movie. I don't think it quite hits the same marks as that first film, though. But I will give it an above average score of a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please do leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.